Good afternoon, and you're very welcome to our Return to Work Roadmap for Irish Professional Services by Guaranteed Irish. I'm Breed O'Connell and I'm with Guaranteed Irish, and I'm delighted to welcome you here today to the webinar on the month that celebrates professional services. And in Guaranteed Irish, as you know, over the last number of years, we've changed our positioning in terms of supporting businesses who support jobs, who support communities, and who showcase provenance with pride and contribute to the economy here in Ireland. And it's never been more of an important time, I suppose, for Guaranteed Irish at the moment, as we all look to see how we can support each other and support Irish businesses across the island. I'm delighted to talk about such an important topic on the webinar today, and more importantly, I suppose, to thank Davy, who've come on board with Guaranteed Irish as our sponsors across our webinar series, which are run every Thursday. And today's spotlight is a particular interesting subject on the area of returning to work. To join me with that, I'm delighted to have great speakers who include Deirdre Crowley, partner with Matheson. Deirdre is the expert on employment law and privacy, and she's heavily involved with the businesses and advising them throughout Ireland on returning to work on privacy issues at the moment. A big concern, I would say, for a lot of businesses. Along with Deirdre, we have David Mcconnell from CBRE. I'm delighted to have you with us, David, and thank you all for taking the time. David is the Executive Director and Head of Building Consultancy at CBRE Ireland, leading CBRE's own approach to returning to the workplace, as well as being engaged by a number of clients to support on how to prepare their space and get staff ready for a phased return. In addition to the immediate impact and responsibility to assist clients reopening their workplace, he's also working with some clients as they look to modify future office design or retrofit solutions for long term. So interesting topics there from David. I'm also happy to introduce Michael Lahouse from Bank of Ireland, who is the Director of Business Banking. Michael is a career banker and has held a number of senior management and executive positions, including commercial branch manager, regional business manager, head of small business and agriculture, regional manager, and head of business banking growth. And I suppose, particularly at the moment, successfully implementing a number of change programs, which has enabled the Bank of Ireland to be the #1 provider of SME lending in Ireland while supporting businesses at all stages of the business life cycle. So, Michael, lots of people will be looking for advice on how to keep that business going out there. Tom, you're very welcome. Tom Phillips of and Associates is with the architects and town planners, so will help us look and consider areas of office plan design and the future and how to manage that with social distancing as being a big issue for us at the moment. David Collins of Kpmg. David is a director in Kpmg and leads the digital competency in management consultancy. David, we're delighted to have you, and I know you'll give us big insights in terms of large organizations and how we're going to, I suppose, manage the digitalization as we combine working at home and in the office. And I'm going to chair the event for the hour. We'll keep on time. So the structure of the event is really as per the invitation. We're going to have a couple of questions with each of our participants. And once I ask the question, I won't interrupt. I'll take the questions and answers at the end to make the Zoom more effective for all of you who are listening. So I think that's going to be important that you get good sound effects. Please feel free to jump in and ask your Q&A on the session, which is on your bottom bar. And we'd love to take the questions, and we'll ask them at the end to each of the participants. So to start with, in terms of David from CBRE, how will the offices need to be adapted to facilitate a return to work? And are you concerned about office property in the market out there, particularly in Dublin? David, you're actually on mute there, so we'll just start that again.
Apologies, that was my fault. Yeah, thanks, Breed. There's two parts to this. The first is the short-term solution, and the next is the long-term. And where most businesses are at the moment, they're clearly focusing on the short-term. And there's two areas that need to be considered in the short-term. The first is, how many people can I physically fit into my office following socially distancing guidelines? And the second is, how am I going to occupy that space? So, you know, in our own office, for example, where we've done the social distancing guidelines, we put the 2 meters circle around each position. We find that our capacity is approximately halved. So 50% of our original normal working office isn't available to use following guidelines. The next question then, we had to survey our staff to find out how many people can we physically, or how many people can come home to work or come back to work, or comfortable to do so. And there's people there who just can't come back because of childcare and those sorts of issues. And our response rate was about 54%. So effectively, we're accommodating 54% of people back in the office, which luckily corresponds with the sort of capacity that we do have in the office. And additionally, we're also looking at A and B teams. So in reality, the first stage of this return will only have 30 people of approximately 140 people in per week, until we move into the next phase, which is going to be when the government sort of releases the 2 meter social distancing, then we'll be able to densify the office again. So this could be going on for quite some time, you know. What's interesting as well, I suppose, is that 54% of our staff said that they could return to the office. But when our UK teams were interviewed, it was much lower. And I think that's partly to do with the infrastructure we have in Dublin. We're not so heavily reliant on public transport to the same extent that, say, for example, London is. So I think smaller cities are going to have a quicker reaction, perhaps, to getting people back into the office to work, you know. So that's kind of in the short term, and we've been working with other clients to help them through that in terms of putting together those phase plans and working in terms of the allocation of desking and whatnot. In the long term, though, there's definitely going to be an impact already on some of the projects that we're working on. We're re-specifying materials at a design stage, things like harder surfaces for easier cleaning. You know, where are we going with, introduction of contactless access control systems, proximity readers, all these sorts of things will become the norm, I believe, and up-speccing as well of mechanical, electrical, ventilation systems within the building. So increasing the amount of air changes per hour is all stuff that are going to make employees feel more comfortable within office spaces moving forward. Smart building technology, I think, is going to be a big feature in the long term as well. Being able to track staff throughout a building, look for bottlenecks, whether it's thermal imaging cameras on reception or it's, you know, facial recognition, those types of things. But, you know, what's for sure is that the post-COVID world is definitely going to be very different from the pre-COVID world in terms of how people occupy their office space. You're on mute, Brie.
Sorry, we're all so used to being on all the time. Tom, may I come to you then on that point as a planner and as an architect? Are you seeing an office, a demand for a change in design of offices, and how is that going to affect planning going down the road?
Thanks, Brie, and hello, everybody. I think, well, I like to rely on an American politician called Donald to answer these questions, and not Donald Trump, but Donald Rumsfeld, and his great expression of known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. So the known knowns is that we'll have to change the way we behave in terms of offices and how offices work. And as a planner, just a point of view, is there's been a lot of concern about the over-dominance of Dublin and about how Dublin is soaking up all the people in the country. And I think one of the issues, and as probably a positive out of this, is the fact that we can be more regionalised in our approach to offices in the country and how people work. And I think about that very good ad on TV for one of the mobile phone companies, which said bringing broadband to the island gave life back to the island. And that might help take some of the pressure off Dublin in the medium and long term. In terms of how it works in terms of offices, as a kind of a known unknown, you could imagine that we'll have to change how offices are. I don't think it's an external expression of offices, but probably an internal expression of offices, in the sense that I can't see the planning code or the external form of our offices largely changing, but I imagine that internally they will change, where the reception desk with somebody sitting there static all day might have to change, and how people space out the spaces within the buildings for co-workers will change. And also the encouragement of people to work from home, because in our own office, I think we lost some very good people in 2019 because we weren't offering flexible working hours, and we weren't offering people's ability to work from their houses. Some people are commuting from Wicklow and we're just fed up commuting in every day into Harcourt Street. And I think that is a positive, that we will actually probably retain more staff in the sense of giving them the flexibility to work either full-time or part-time from home. In terms of other matters then, in terms of the infrastructure, I suppose it will have put a big emphasis on having the correct broadband infrastructure into the country that people can connect in wirelessly into these calls, because they're a big part. But I think on balance, I would say in our own business, that if I had a big A3 printer in my house, I'd be happy to work all day long at home, but I only need to come into the office to print out drawings. That's my problem. But overall, I think it's been a positive for our company. And I begin to wonder why we're after signing another 5-year lease in our company that might actually change, that we could use smaller space for the same number of people in the future.
And not good news there for you, David, in CBRE. There'll be a change of tune. But in terms of the staff, if I can come on to you, Deirdre Crowley, partner with Matheson, and it's nice that Tom mentioned the regional place, because you're obviously based in Cork with Matheson's offices throughout Ireland. But from the Cork perspective and from the law perspective, what key steps must an employer consider to protect our business in the new working environment then?
Thanks, Breed. And yes, very proud to be contributing today all the way from the Rebel County in Cork. And it's certainly a confirmation of the fact that we are in a new world, and this ever-evolving culture that we're now dealing with from an employment and a privacy and a HR point of view, I would agree overall has significant positives as well as challenges. In terms of the key steps that Irish businesses need to take to protect themselves in a return to work scenario, there are 5 key issues that are raised in the return to work safety protocol that was published by the Health and Safety Authority on the 9th of May. And those 5 key steps are, first of all, the appropriate risk assessments. Secondly, preparation of a robust and fit for purpose COVID response plan. Thirdly, then, preparation of a return to work form that's specific to your workplace environment. Fourthly, consultation with your worker representative or the key stakeholders in your business, such as trade unions and others. And fifth, then training. And I think training is going to be a key piece in all of this. So just to break down those 5 key steps that businesses need to take to protect themselves. In terms of the risk assessments, we've got 3 risk assessments. The first is the Health and Safety Risk Assessment. And if we focus on that for a moment, our Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act here in Ireland provides that we must conduct health and safety assessments as a norm in Irish business under Section 19 of the Act. But a key provision in there is that we must review those assessments when necessary. And the protocol that was published on the 9th of May talks about the specific requirements that are now presented by COVID-19. So within that risk assessment, we're going to have a return to work plan that answers the health and safety risks that are uniquely presented by COVID. The second risk assessment, which I'll focus on a little bit later, is a risk assessment from occupational health in terms of managing employee wellness and addressing particular measures that might be required by certain work environments in terms of steps such as temperature testing. We've clients even asking about antibody testing and other types of testing to maintain safety and wellness in the workplace. And finally, then, a key risk assessment is a privacy assessment known as a data protection impact assessment, a DPIA. That document is the golden compliance piece when it comes to potentially subsequently having to explain to the Data Protection Commission how health data is processed in the workplace for the purposes of COVID-19, how an employer addresses those key issues of maintaining a log in terms of visitors, independent contractors, employees all attending on site, bearing in mind that that's a new requirement under the protocol. And finally then assessing that key test as to whether an employer's need to maintain certain measures trumps an employee's expectation to privacy. So to move along in terms of the COVID response plan, the Health and Safety Authority has very helpful precedents available on its website that I would encourage attendees on the webinar to look at. We've seen many clients adopt those response plans published by the Health and Safety Authority. There are 7 key templates available on that website as well that can be tailored to your business's need. And we're happy to confirm that as long as obviously case-specific advice is taken in relation to businesses, that those templates provide very helpful guidance indeed for businesses, and they're there available at your fingertips. In terms of the return to work form, to focus on a key take-home point for businesses on this call, we're emphasizing to clients to make sure that they reserve the discretion in that return to work form to let employees know that they must disclose on an ongoing basis if they have any COVID-19 symptoms. So it's not a once-off obligation that arises, as the protocol suggests, prior to the return to work. Obviously, because of the nature of COVID-19, it's an ongoing obligation. Consultation with key stakeholders is going to be important, and when businesses dig into those precedents published by the Health and Safety Authority, they see that a question that's asked of the worker representative is, has the employer consulted with you in relation to the COVID-19 response planning measures? So that's going to be important, particularly in those cases where potentially employers are going to be challenged for example, for excessive processing of personal data, for more invasive types of testing. Finally, then training is going to be key for the worker representative and for employees returning to work.
Very comprehensive, Deirdre. There's an awful lot of extra work going to be required for the employer.
Indeed, there is an awful lot of extra work, and that's just arising from the new protocol that's coming from the HSA. Other key tips in very high level form are, of course, the cost analysis that's going to have to be undertaken by businesses as a result of COVID-19, and whether there are any cost-cutting measures from the point of view of headcount that will be required arising from COVID-19 when the subsidies expire. So that's all very, very relevant at the moment, and advanced planning is key. And a key recommendation for businesses on the call is that if cost-cutting measures are required, make sure that the evidence that you have gathered to support those measures is objective, it's clear and contemporaneous with the events as they're happening right now. It's much easier to defend a case for fair dismissal by reasons of redundancy, for example, if you can produce contemporaneous evidence which supports the case for redundancy.
So load of food for thought there. David Collins, Director with Kpmg. In the area then of digital transformation, what do businesses need to think about in that space?
Well, Bridge, I guess digital is a bit of a catch-all term, and really when we talk about digital transformation with our clients, fundamentally what we're talking about is how you best enable your employees to best serve your customers, right? So as David said earlier, I think the reality is that remote working is going to play a part in our ways of working for a potentially prolonged period of time. And from what we're hearing from clients, both locally and internationally, is that they're finding a good majority of their employees do wish to work remotely for at least 2 days a week from now on, irrespective of COVID, which I guess is reinforcing Tom's point from earlier about flexible working. I think many organizations, Tom's included, have been pleasantly surprised by the levels of productivity that have been achieved by remote workers over the last few months. And this is borne out by some research that Kpmg conducted in April in the US, where they surveyed both management and non-management employees and found that productivity has remained reasonably steady. 7 in 10 felt that they're actually now collaborating better with their colleagues, and about 64% felt that the quality of their work has actually improved. But the research also found that the degree to which employees feel appreciated and valued by their employers goes a long way towards helping them thrive under these kind of conditions. So those who felt valued by their employer, 94% say that they're more committed now to their work and to their employer than they were before, and around 70% say that the quality of their work has improved. So to maintain these kind of results as remote working continues, we believe that it's very important for employers to find ways to keep their employees engaged. And while good and regular communications are a part of this, we've also found strong correlation between giving employees the right tools and improving their ways of working really help to drive this sense of being valued. So our methodology for digital transformation puts a big focus on reframing how we equip employees to best serve their customers. So while we look at things like customer journeys and the quality of end-to-end processes, how to optimize all of this for a great customer experience, and how technology can play a role, really for us, employee experience is a significant piece of the puzzle. So we've got a ways of working methodology which looks at embedding the best principles of things like Agile and Lean Six Sigma, supported by appropriate technologies to ensure that everyone's pulling in the same direction, spending their time doing the right things and doing things right. But maybe more significantly, making sure that everyone's empowered to proactively suggest and enact improvements in their processes and ways of working. So I know you were looking for tips, Breeze. I guess in terms of a tip, a critical thing that people should be doing right now is establishing mechanisms to capture the voice of their employees. Things like surveys, digital suggestion boxes, etc. To find out really how have your employees found their remote working, how they feel about coming back to the office, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and what do they want to hold on to. And I think this information is important because knowledge workers have time right now to reflect on their working lives and what they want from their employers. And if you want engaged and empowered employees and you want to be an employer of choice into the future, you really need to consider how best you're going to meet these emerging employee needs.
Thanks, David. Michael, can I ask then from Bank of Ireland, how will businesses keep going from a banking perspective? Because there are challenges out there at the moment in terms of continuity.
Yes, Breed, thanks for that question. Look, I think I'd break this probably out into two different areas. There's the service requirements and then there's the funding requirements. And I think the reality is it varies significantly depending on what sector you're in. So whether it's in professional services, retail, hospitality, manufacturing, the requirements are all very different. I think the one piece, what we're certainly seeing is there's a far more move to digital in terms of online channels and that's both in terms of from a customer delivering service, but also in terms of taking banking services. And that's an important aspect in terms of to make sure that for any business understanding what are their day-to-day requirements and that they can now do online. There will be different channels available depending on the complexity of what you require. So to make sure that that you have that availability in terms of the right service level. So you can make, whether you want to make just single payments to people or you require bulk payments or different functionality. So that's one area. I think the other area is in terms of the significant shift to card spending versus cash. I think we've probably all seen a reduction in the use of cash over the last while, but that seems to be an area that I think will be a lasting impact in terms of of COVID-19, the reduction in cash and making sure that, again, from a business perspective, you have the various functionality that allows smooth card payments. I think one of the stats we've seen is an increase in 40% spending on groceries, but that's through monitoring card payments. I don't think people are buying 40% more groceries. It's just that it's all card based now versus cash. So that has an impact from a day-to-day service point of view. The funding piece is probably a different perspective. And an internal conversation, someone last week about managing cash flow, but to be honest, it's probably more managing cash because the flow has stopped in a lot of sectors. It actually is just trying to manage your day-to-day requirements. And I'd say there's two things. One is in terms of availing of payment breaks. So for any business that is impacted by COVID-19, has a reduction in it might just be their cash flow cycle as opposed to in terms of an actual hit to their overall income. But do look for a payment break and take a payment break to give that space to allow the business to deal with other implications of COVID-19 and not have debt repayments having to come through. I suppose the European Banking Authority and the central banks moved quickly to support the banks in allowing that flexibility to be given without having any impact on a business's or person's credit rating. But if you haven't applied for or taken that payment break by the 30th of June, it will have an imprint on your credit rating, or it'd be more difficult to put in place. So I'd encourage anyone, if you need it, even if you think you might need it, apply quickly for it. And then on the funding requirements, I would say there's definitely an understandable hesitancy from businesses not to take on additional debt at this point in time, and wait and see what other supports might be put in place from a government point of view. But we do see a lot of business coming even to get lines put in place just in case they need it, to deal with particularly the impacts as the economy starts to open up again, which I think when we'll see more impacts in terms of from a day-to-day cash flow perspective.
Thanks, Michael. In terms of David Mcconnell of CBRE, may I just ask what trends and occupier sentiment are you seeing at a European level in a post-COVID world, and how might this translate into a company's long-term real estate strategy here?
Yeah, great. So yeah, we carried out a sort of flash survey across Europe, including Ireland, of about 254 companies, and the findings that came back were quite interesting. A lot of it is echoed in some of the comments that have been made today already. But obviously, so 71% of respondents expect their revenue to contract this year. So that was to be expected. But interestingly, healthcare and life sciences are actually a little bit more buoyant, in that only 44% of those sectors felt that they would be impacted this year, which is an interesting stat. That then leads on to, I suppose, cash coming in terms of leasing decisions. So 82% of respondents felt that their leasing or their property strategies this year would be impacted. So they're either postponing expansions in this current period of COVID and looking at those ideas of what they were going to do in terms of how to use their space or whether to expand. But what I would say is that there is other options there. So if you're in a lease, for example, and you think that you're going to employ more working from home, and that you may not need that type of space, there's things that can be done, whether you look at leasing regearing or restacking your space, subleasing. There's always options out there in terms of how to make your property space work for you as such as well. Other things that were interesting there, like, so 90% of those on the survey said that they'll lead to an increased adoption of working from home, very similar to what everybody else has been saying also here. And because of that, then 88% said that they'll look at an increase in investment in digital technology to enable that. But and almost half those on the call on the survey said that they would be reviewing their locational footprint. I think what we'll see there is that you could see contraction in terms of like HQs, the size of HQs, and as Tom, I think, said earlier on, that may push out more regional offices. So, you know, people reducing their commutes, etc. But what I don't believe, when you weigh up the reduced density of offices as well, because you're not going to have offices as densely occupied with working from home, there may be a sort of it may weigh each other out there a little bit, in the fact that, you know, you still need the same amount of space because you're less dense, but you then have a working from home. But what we need to be careful of is that if you adopt a working from home policy, and where it's in the office, that you don't end up with these, you know, empty offices on a Monday and a Friday and absolutely crammed on a Wednesday. So there's an important operational piece there to think about, how you produce that working from home strategy within the company as well. And you know, I think ultimately, you know, as Tom said, he's happy to work from home there with an A3 printer, but I think it depends on the type of work. Like, we're seeing a lot of respondents in the survey who would prefer to be in the office sometime for the type of work that they're doing, but other time they need to be together for collaboration. Those simple conversations, passing each other in the corridor, hey, what's happening with that project that we're working on, what's happening with that deal, etc. Those are quick conversations that can happen, and don't necessarily need a Zoom call, which can be quite tiring. Which probably leads me on to just some of the sentiment from employees as well. So on the survey, 1.2 hours is the increased amount of time, working time, that these companies believe that they're getting from employers. So people are working on average 1.2 hours longer per day because they're working from home, obviously reduced commutes and those sorts of things. But 46% report more meetings, which is an interesting statistics as well. Like, I mean, that's Zoom meetings or obviously conference calls, but 46% isn't a great statistics, I don't think, for increased number of meetings. But 84% have actually experienced neutral or positive impact on their sense of productivity. But that comes at a cost, because of that 43%, or almost half, report an increase in mental effort. So we have to ask the question, is this sustainable to be doing so many Zoom calls? Is it sustainable to be increasing that mental effort in a work week? That you could have long-term mental effects on staff, mental health issues with staff, etc. So we need to be thinking about how we deal with all of those things from an employee point of view. And then the last point there is that 37% of those respondents also said that they would prefer to come back to the office now, but it's not essential for them to do their job. So there is that sense of community, sense of company, the collaboration piece that I was talking about. So, you know, I guess in summary, what I'm saying is that I don't necessarily think that we'll see a reduction in the amount of office space that companies need. It'll just be different, less densely populated, and perhaps it'll be more spread from a regional point of view as well.
Thanks for that, David. They're very interesting stats. But in terms of, have you any stat on the age profile of those who most want to go back into the office?
I don't have it in front of me at the moment, to be honest with you. But yeah, it's an interesting point. I think part of I know when we surveyed our own staff in CBRE, the people who wanted to come back in the office would tend to be people with a sales point, you know, agents or brokers, those types of guys, but also people who live in shared accommodation and don't have sufficient office facilities at home or set up at home. You know, the younger people generally who graduates, those types of guys who are maybe working out of a bedroom and that type of stuff.
Yeah, I'd imagine. So it'll be interesting to see that as it evolves, and I suppose the mental health application or implications as a result of the intense Zooming that everybody's doing. Is probably going to be an issue for debate. And we'll come on to that in a minute with you, Deirdre, in terms of employee welfare, etc. But Tom, if I can just go to you there at the moment, if you're off mute, I'm really interested in, we're out there at the moment, and obviously with lockdown, a lot less traffic, lots more people on their bikes. Is there going to be a big difference, and do you see big changes in terms of opportunities on our public realm planning, and how that will then affect us, particularly in city living and getting to work in city spaces? Is there going to be a change, and are there opportunities for us in the area of the public realm planning, cycling, pedestrianisation, and then what knock-on effect will that have on businesses and the employees there?
I do. Thanks, Breed, and I agree fully with what David Mcconnell had just said and all those points. I was actually just thinking, as he said, my wife would probably say I'm a spoofer for pretending I like to work at home. I actually like to escape. I'm in the office at the moment, and I like to escape here. But in terms of the public realm, the cycling is getting the boost that it needs all along. That there's been a lot of concern about the over-dominance of the car, and this is all fine. I'm being nervous here, being slightly Dublin-centric here on this, because there's also problems in Galway and Cork and other places with commuting. So I think that will have a positive effect. I think also the staggered workplace, because I agree with David as well about the offices. We're putting in applications for offices, and I don't see people stop building offices or stop having them. I think it'll be staggered use. It mightn't be the 9 to 5 that we're used to. And that's a positive, because I even know my own staff, so some of them send me emails late at night, not because they're overly productive, but because they've got young children or they're trying to adapt their working day. So in terms of cycle lanes, it's very positive that we're building them. But I've always got a concern in Dublin City that we're doing transportation initiatives in bite-sized chunks as opposed to holistically. So we do Metro one year, Lewis the following year, then cycle lanes, as opposed to, and the bus connects in Dublin City. So we need to look at a bigger issue about transportation. But I think in general, it would be a positive, particularly if we can encourage people, those who can cycle. But also, it's as a planner, I find it very frustrating that we're being forced to build residential units outside of the city and outside of the suburban areas and forcing people to commute. So it's not just one solution to this. It has to be that we embrace taller buildings in Dublin and Docklands, that we embrace, and I'm not objective in that, I'm very subjective because I'm promoting it, but I think we need to embrace it and allow people to live in the city if they want, and also to allow people to if they do choose to live in town, like fantastic town like Boyle, County Roscommon, for example. It always frustrates me to look at Boyle, which is really good architecture underlining it, but there's no real employment for people and there's no real opportunity. So people feel if they grow up there, they have to leave. And I think people should have the infrastructure that they can stay where they want to. And if they do have to commute 2 days a week, so be it. But I don't see a situation that would have everybody working at home or everybody in the office. I think it'll be a staggered, possibly the 2 day a week issue, which should overall help the commuting patterns.
Absolutely, thanks Tom. And in terms of your point there, David, as well, to go on the back of that, if the commuting, if we do the staggered return, it's our one opportunity, I suppose, to do this. So if we embrace this in a positive way, if we do the staggered return, it will take the heat out of the congestion. And I suppose the review of things like the metro and all that are going to be all to play for in terms of public spending, which might be a bit of a relief, bearing in mind the results that were published yesterday. Deirdre, a lot of questions coming in, but may I just ask, how can we ensure that the well-being of the staff, and questions coming in relation to staff well-being, what do we have to do now in a post-COVID-19 global work environment? Because it's affecting everybody across the world. Where are you on that?
Well, helpfully, we're centred very much in terms of our legal obligation to provide a safe and healthy place of work for employees, which is the traditional obligation, again, under Section 8 of the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act. But interestingly, we're seeing that concept of employee wellness mature and develop in line with the changes that COVID is bringing about. And in the Return to Work Safely Protocol published by the HSA, we see clear obligations in terms of our need to provide a safe place of work and to monitor employee well-being. And that brings with it its own business advantages as well, because there's obviously the key focus here of not only providing a safe place of work and looking after well-being, but also talent retention. And regardless of the climate, good people are always in demand. So communication in terms of wellness, checking in with each other and scheduling specific check-in calls that would substitute for the coffee at work or the chat at the photocopier must be more consciously undertaken now. And certainly a key strategy needs to be put in place as part of the COVID response plan in terms of employee wellness. There are entities that can assist businesses, again, depending on size, depending on need, depending on the specific purpose of the business. And one of those key protections can come about from the use of occupational health services. And specifically in terms of COVID and wellness, obviously employers are focused on making sure that insofar as possible, they have systems set up such that a COVID cluster is avoided in the workplace. And to that extent, there are key steps that employers can take from the point of view of employee wellness to make sure that they're ahead of that potential possibility. I mentioned earlier the notion of self-declaration forms, for example, and interestingly, the protocol again is helpful in terms of the questions that it suggests to employers to ask, and there are 6 key questions on the form, and those questions will assist in ensuring that an appropriate level of wellness is available in the workplace. Where matters become more tricky is where employers have specific work environments where they feel that they need to roll out additional measures over and above the measures in the Return to Work Safely Protocol. And interestingly, I think it's important to reframe for businesses who are participating on this call that the temperature testing, for example, that's referred to in the Return to Work Safely Protocol is only mandatory where relevant health authorities say that temperature testing is mandatory. And at the moment, that's only mandatory in healthcare environments or in residential settings, residential care settings. But if we take that a step further, what we're seeing a lot from clients is that they are engaging with measures over and above the simple measures that are in the 6 questions, and they exclude temperature testing and other types of testing. And we're being asked to assist businesses to understand, A, if they can implement those measures, and B, if they do implement them, how do they implement them in such a way as to protect employee wellness, protect visitors and independent contractors' wellness, and indeed to protect themselves from a compliance point of view. So it's very important in those circumstances to take a considered approach to temperature testing and any other type of testing, bearing in mind the priority on the one hand to maintain employee wellness, but on the other hand to also ensure that an employer hasn't overstepped the mark in terms of excessive processing of data. And that's where your privacy assessment comes in, and that's where vital assistance from occupational health comes in terms of advising what measures are reasonable and appropriate for your particular workplace. So I hope that assists in terms of answering that question.
Thanks, Deirdre. I have a few more questions for you afterwards at the end, but I'll just run through another question for David Collins, on Director of Kpmg. You've spoken about the digital transformation in your last question there, David, in terms of empowering employees, but there's also a technology process perspective. Can you talk a little bit about this, please?
Sure, yeah. So again, when we talk about digital transformation, it's really not just about throwing technology at a problem, but about how best you enable your employees to serve your existing customers and to find new ones. From a process point of view, while there can be a technology element, really it's about eliminating wasted effort and saving time, and a handy byproduct of which should be saving money and generating revenue. So, you know, in the last few months, we've seen many months, if not years worth of process transformation happen in a very short space of time. And I think many organizations have surprised themselves by proving that significant change can be executed at pace when necessary. We've seen businesses rapidly rolling out new or improved customer-facing digital channels, as well as putting in place internal technologies to enable remote working, for example. I guess where we've really seen organizations struggle is with what we like to call the Wizard of Oz processes, where you've got a nice snazzy digital front end, which is used to capture information and kickstart a process. But in the background, somebody's furiously turning wheels and pulling levers to execute it manually. And they're struggling at the moment because things like paper forms and red pens, for example, aren't available to them. And you know, the consequence of that is that quality suffers, processing time gets longer, but also important things like auditability, data trails, data quality, they all suffer when a manual process comes under pressure. KPMG's digital transformation methodology is called Connected Enterprise, because for us, it's about ensuring that our clients' processes work effectively front to back all the way through. So what happens at the front is just as efficiently processed in your middle and back offices, so you have a smooth and high quality end-to-end process. In the service of that, recently we've seen significant uptake in interest in technologies like robotic process automation and low-code platforms, things like Microsoft Power Apps, for example. You know, a lot of organizations had these classified in a bucket marked interesting somewhere, and maybe had done proofs of concepts or prototypes to dip their toe and see if they work. But they've quickly advanced these to try to counter some of these kind of issues that we've seen. And you know, these new technologies, they are production ready and they are good to go, as it were. They can be deployed at pace. Some of our colleagues in the UK, for example, developed and deployed a production-ready data capture form literally over a weekend for use in doing COVID-related inspections in the UK Health Service. And they did that using Microsoft Power Apps. So because these inspections were now done electronically, they were able to do them far more rapidly, far more effectively by taking the paper out and having everything captured electronically. I guess it kind of comes back to my earlier point about employee engagement. You know, when you look at deploying these kinds of solutions and technologies, it doesn't have to be about cost savings and job losses. And again, it shouldn't be about trying to put a sticking plaster over a bad process. It's about helping to improve already well-designed processes by automating time-consuming and repetitive tasks, improving auditability, and giving your employees time to work on bigger and better things. Again, if I had a tip to offer, really, I think people should start taking stock of their processes at the moment, right? Which ones have worked well, which ones are continuing to work well, and which ones have really struggled. I guess just as importantly, do you have the data to support this, or is it just anecdotal evidence that you're relying upon? Because if it's anecdotal, you've probably got another problem as well. And again, really, it's about what kind of organization do you want to be when we emerge from this? Do you want to be an employer of choice where employees are empowered to do, you know, great things, make things continuously better, or are they asked to spend their time doing the kind of manual and repetitive tasks that could be taken away by some of these new technologies or by implementing better processes?
Thanks, David. Michael Lauhoff, Bank of Ireland, what are you seeing from your customers and how are they holding up? What are they doing to survive themselves out there in business? Because it's rough out there.
Yeah, and I think Tom's quote earlier from Donald Rumsfeld is probably the most apt quote I've heard. I'll be using that again, Tom. And I think that's really, it is about the known knowns. So if you take in terms of what we've been discussing here in terms of office layout and usage, people know there's going to be reduced capacity and are going to have to change structures. Known unknowns, if you take maybe the hospitality sector, is it going to be 1 meter or 2 meters? Huge differences in implications in terms of social distancing, what it would mean for their businesses. And then the unknown unknowns is the behavioural aspects of things. So how human behaviour will change on foot of COVID-19 and how I suppose consumers or people choose to interact in businesses. And that's a real unknown for businesses looking forward. What we do see though is in terms of initial actions, in terms of trying to take action to protect against and mitigate against some of those known knowns. And if we look at the professional services sector, there's already some spend on premises and trying to adapt them. It does require time and investment in terms of for staff to be able to work from home effectively, and also looking at in terms of the reduced maybe business flow in terms of what steps can they put in place to manage from a cash point of view. It is very much though looking at their existing business and understanding what steps can they take. We're probably seeing quite a hesitancy, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of taking on debt, but also for other businesses about protecting reserves. So actually, in terms of saying putting a funding line in place so it's available to them, rather than depleting some cash reserves that they're holding on to for future. I do think, though, in a number of sectors are effectively in hibernation. So nothing has happened for the last 3 months. And it is as the restrictions start to get loosened and doors open that some of the implications will become clearer, and that will bring more immediate requirements. I think though it is important to understand what are the pieces you do know you're going to have to address, and put actions in place that will help you to address those. Even if you can't do it now, that you're ready to do it once restrictions have been opened up. But I think there are supports being put in place for our businesses, but there's also I think a necessary requirement to put structures in place yourself too that you know you can deal with. And what I mean by that is, rather than waiting to see is there more supports put out from government, actually look at what's available there at the moment and put lines in place. If you don't use them, it doesn't cost you anything, but at least you have something available to you in case there isn't anything additional provided.
Thanks for that, Michael. A couple of questions in here for the general panel. I'll start actually with you, Deirdre, if I may, in relation to legal. Can Deirdre comment on GDPR implications to working at home?
Yes, and there's a very helpful guidance note published by the Data Protection Commission, which is available on their website, about remote working. And it reinforces themes, particularly in relation to security of data. And the fact that now, obviously, because we're working from home, we may be dealing with sensitive data in the workplace, and both the technological basis and the manual basis for processing that data needs to be reviewed from a security point of view. The Data Protection Commission has also talked about GDPR issues in relation to the reliability from a privacy point of view of certain platforms, and that employers and businesses are reminded to check the security settings on various platforms and not to automatically, if you like, accept an invitation from an unknown platform, or one that perhaps has some privacy concerns that are well publicized.
Another question, are employers responsible for the health and safety at home? That's a bit of a minefield, isn't it?
That is a minefield, because what is the workplace? The workplace has become the home, and it is very interesting to now consider that the duty to provide a safe, healthy and reliable place of work must extend to the home by logical extension of this new world that we're living in, and that does bring with it its own questions in relation to, for example, ergonomic assessments and screens at the correct height and the correct chairs to avoid the typical type of back pain for desk-based employees. So questions now do turn to health and safety in the home as the new workplace.
Oh, bit of a nightmare. A question possibly for David McConnell and Tom Phillips. Does the panel have any comment or advice for businesses that are based in shared offices, for example, WeWork? Does the responsibility for safety risk assessment lie with the landlord, which would be WeWork in that case, or should this shared model of responsibility, how would it be approached?
Okay, I'll jump in there if that's okay. So, you know, I think in the main, landlords have been very responsive from what we're seeing as well. Where you have a shared or multi-tenanted building, landlords will have the responsibility for, you know, the social distancing in those areas such as reception, you know, toilets, and they need to put in place the measures there that you as an occupier would put in place in your own demise, if you like. Some of the difficulties that we're seeing is in vertical transportation. How do you get people to floors in lifts in a safe manner without not socially distancing, if you like? And some solutions we're seeing is that landlords are cordoning off lifts into 4 sectors. In other instances, we're seeing landlords allocate lifts to specific floors. So if you're on 3rd floor, for example, and there's sufficient number of lifts, that lift only stops on the 3rd floor. So as a group of people, you're almost you know, minimizing the amount of contact in a multi-tenanted building. But certainly there is responsibility on the landlord side to ensure that measures are in place in those landlord spaces. And then we're seeing that typically they would push back to the occupier within their own demise, that they then take on, you know, in the working and the office environment, that they're managing that as the tenant in their own space.
And Tom?
Well, I agree a lot with what David said. I was reading some interesting information about Canary Wharf, for example, with a very massive number of people, how they're going to handle the lifts. That would be one of the big issues. But I think I'm kind of optimistic. Maybe I'm foolishly optimistic. I don't think that's going to last forever. And I hope we don't just get knee-jerk reactions to what could be, and hopefully is, a relatively short-term situation. I mean, it might be naive, but I think with proper protocol, it can work. And I do accept that the lifts are problems, and obviously transit to and from companies are problems. But in themselves, I don't think that we're going to see the end of shared accommodation in terms of offices, nor do I think we're going to see the end of shared accommodation for people living in residence under the new shared accommodation initiatives. So I think they will both work. We just have to adapt to new ways of behaving. I mean, my own 4 kids now wash their hands more than they ever did. So I've changed my ways, and I think we'll all change our ways. So I think overall, like, we could get a lot of positives out of this. We just need to embrace it and prepare for it, I suppose.
Yeah, I think just one final point on that is that probably, you know, you need to think of it, it's a bit like planning for earthquakes and earthquake zones. It might never happen, but it's happened once now with us, and going forward, design will be impacted to identify the risk of a pandemic outbreak, and that where there's sensible solutions, I think that'll you know, be implemented into design going forward.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask each of the panels to give their top 2 tips before we round up. But I think it's important to zone in on your point there, Tom. An awful lot of positives have come out of this for work-life balance and the whole public realm piece in terms of traffic, etc. Now, it's a nightmare to manage in terms of getting everything right. So from the legal perspective, Deirdre, we're completely led and fed by the likes of yourselves and Matheson. But it's certainly challenging, but there are opportunities here for all of us, not just in Ireland, but across the globe. I know in Guaranteed Irish we've been very busy because everybody in Ireland at the moment is really trying to support their own and do the right thing by their own Irish economy and keep those jobs out there. So we've never had a higher application rating for members to become for businesses to become members, which is good in one sense, but it also has really driven that whole sustainability agenda, which was our key agenda before COVID, let's not forget, in terms of supporting local and in terms of holding jobs and in terms of reducing the carbon factor. And I suppose we'll see that in the aviation sector to their detriment in terms of business travellers. But I'd really like to capture, if you like, the summary of 2 main points from each of our speakers, if I may, starting with yourself there, Dave McConnell.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I guess what I'm effectively saying, there's increased working from home, but that's not the solution for all businesses going forward. I think it's going to be this hybrid of working from home and office, because really the office is a focal point for your company, and you just can't take that away. People need that, and I think collaboration and the best ideas happen in those sorts of environments, and that's how businesses will grow going forward. And I suppose secondly, similar to your point, Breed, is that we're going to see, I think anyway, a big change in companies' view on business travel, because that'll support not just the sustainability factor in reducing their footprint, but given this huge global pilot that we've had of working from home and Zoom calls, that's going to, there's going to be more questions asked. Why do you need to travel to San Francisco for that particular meeting or whatever? So it's going to have a two impact. One is cost for the business will be reduced, but also it'll help support those sustainability criteria that so many companies have on the agenda now as well.
And Tom Phillips.
That's great. I suppose I just two key verbs. One is embrace, and the other is prepare. Like we know that it's here, so we have to, I suppose, prepare for it in one sense. But in terms of embracing it, it's all very well. I have to remind myself, I'm looking at the perspective of a 55-year-old man, as opposed to maybe some of the people who work in my office who share with 3 or 4 colleagues. It's something that David picked up on earlier on. Like 1 or 2 of my colleagues, one of the colleagues who actually was pushing for flexible working hours is the greatest advocate for returning back to the office, because she's fed up with she's sharing with 2 guys and she's had enough of them. They're all working off a kitchen table. So I suppose it's to make sure that we look after, with our embracing it, we look after both our customers as well as our employees, and look across the board at all our employees. Like I was just thinking, we've got one of our employees is stuck in Poland at the moment, and we're working on with her every day with no real drop off in productivity. We've got someone else in Dundalk, someone else down in 2 or 3 down in Cork, and different parts of the country. So try and embrace it and say that it's a known that it's here. So work with it and see how we can work with it and keep in contact with our customers as well. And in terms of preparation, I think it's shown up and partly forced some of the bad practices we have. Because as a town planner, what really annoyed me is we've been talking since 2008 about an electronic planning system in Ireland, and the first thing they did is shut it down for 8 weeks. So there was no, you couldn't make plan applications, you could submit it to local authorities, they wouldn't process it. So I think it's the force companies in the private sector and the public sector to prepare for this and to work out ways we can work better and make our companies more efficient. So prepare and embrace are the 2 key verbs I would use.
Deirdre, may I come to you in particular, the employment law and the staff well-being, which is really interesting for everybody, I think, listening, and we're getting the most questions on that.
Sure. So my top tip recommendation in that space is to make sure that your return to work form reminds employees that the duty to disclose COVID-related symptoms is an ongoing duty, and a recommendation for those delegates attending in HR to follow up with employees regularly, and I would suggest at least weekly, if not more often as possible, to remind them of the importance of wellness and the importance of self-declaration of symptoms in the interests of everybody in the working environment. Secondly, just a top tip in terms of the privacy piece is to conduct your data protection impact assessment, bearing in mind any recommendations from a wellness point of view from occupational health, so that you take the steps that are reasonable and proportionate in the context of your work environment to best protect employee wellness.
Thanks, Deirdre. David Collins with Kpmg, digital transformation, top 2 tips to go away with?
Yeah, I guess it's really about what kind of organization do you want to be when we emerge from this. So as Deirdre said, you need to have mechanisms in place to remind employees of their obligations, etc., but also to listen to the voice of your employees. What do they want from you as an employer in future? How do you stay as an employer of choice? And the second one is about taking stock of your end-to-end processes. You've really road tested them now. You can see what's worked and what hasn't. It's time to look at what can be improved to work smoother and to free up your employees to work on what really matters rather than spending their time doing manual type tasks.
Thanks, David. Finally, Michael with banking, top 2 tips there from your perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Bree. Just from a pure banking perspective, and the 2 tips are probably quite aligned. The first I would say is in terms of anyone that does need a payment break, so that's a break from loan repayments, whether it's in a personal or business capacity, look for it early, look for it now. if you do look for close to the end of June, it's going to be more, it could have a lasting impact on your credit rating. Before that it won't. So if you even think you might need it, I'd encourage people to consider that now immediately. And the second piece is in terms of just for future funding requirements. Look, there's a lot of uncertainty out there in terms of impacts as the economy starts to open up. So any business plan is going to be heavily caveated in terms of what's going to happen. Don't let that stop you coming looking for a funding requirement. Uncertainty is always part of our future. But just if you do have a need, come early and work with your bank to get the proper lines in place to support you as the reopening of the economy kicks off.
Thanks very much, Michael. May I just come in at this point and say the champions of professional services on the board of Guaranteed Irish, who are voluntary directors, are Michael Jackson of Matheson and Carmel Logan of Kpmg, and they are the energy behind getting today's webinar set up for the professional services. I think a huge sector in Ireland are working and are employed in the professional services, and it's an area that can go unchampioned. So it's great to have that energy behind people like Guaranteed Irish and organisations that actually do try to make a difference. So thank you to them. I'd also like to thank Davy as our sponsors of the webinars as we go forward every Thursday with our webinars. And most importantly, thank you for attending and giving us your time. But again, I'd like to thank David Mcconnell of CBRE, Tom Phillips from Tom Phillips and Associates, Deirdre Crowley, partner with Matheson, and David Collins, director of management consulting in Kpmg, and Michael Lauhoff, director of business banking in Bank of Ireland. Really appreciate you putting in your time and effort into this. I think there's huge value to be gained from these conversations. It's uncharted territory. None of us in any of our businesses have done it before, and we do appreciate your participation. Many thanks. Next week, we will have our webinar on the topic of sustainability. As we mentioned today, very key topic still, and it hasn't gone away. It's still an issue for us, and it's being hosted and delivered with our members, Smurfit Kappa. So I hope you can join in on that at 2 p.m., the later time of 2 p.m, with Gary Brown and Rory O'Mahony. Sustainable packaging, thinking outside the box, a relevant catchy phrase. So looking forward to having you join in with that. In the meantime, many thanks again for all your help, and thank you particularly to the panelists.
Thank you.